And so I think Afghanistan really guided me into my own blind spots that were very much formed by living and studying the Western world. One of the greatest lessons was that you cannot measure human beings. You cannot measure growth just through data and graphs and Excel sheets. And, and you can't just write reports about what you want to do and track it. You really have to meet people in the heart. And what that means is that you have to meet yourself in the heart first in order to make that connection. So it was a very humbling experience. It was a very rich experience.
Welcome to the Voices of Emergence. I am Rudy Dewala, and this is a space where inner transformation meets systemic regeneration, where we sit with courageous thinkers, bridge builders, community weavers, and vision holders, reimagining leadership, culture, and community from the ground of consciousness and care. In each episode, we explore how do we move beyond extractive systems? How do we meet a world in transition with soul, integrity, and imagination? Join us as we reclaim the wisdom of the body, embrace the paradox of being human, and step into a living story of emergence, coherence, and possibility. I'm joined today by my dear friend and co-host Alex de Carvalho. He's a systems thinker, global connector, and lifelong explorer of human potential. And his background bridges technology, culture, and leadership. His journey spans continents and disciplines. Together, we dive into the emerging stories, questions, and possibilities of a world in transformation. So with that, I'll hand it over to Alex to welcome today's guest, Samina Vabo Ansari.
Thank you, Rudy, and it's a pleasure to have you, Samina. Really feel honored. We're honored to welcome Samina Vabo Ansari, an Afghan-Norwegian leader whose work bridges diplomacy, innovation, and ethical imagination. Whether convening grassroots changemakers or speaking on global stages, Samina embodies a rare quality of resonance, one that listens, invites, and catalyzes the collective. Her Afghan-Norwegian heritage and global experience across Europe, Central Asia, and the US inform a deeply relational, multidimensional approach to leadership. She's worked with institutions such as the EU, UN Women, the World Bank, and NATO. And she is passionate about weaving technology, gender equity, and social sustainability into holistic, transformative solutions. So welcome, Samina.
Thank you so much, Rudy and Alex. I am really humbled to be here.
Really happy to speak with you. Let's start. My first question to you would be, when you hear the word emergence, what comes alive in you?
Thank you. I feel that language is a very interesting tool that we have developed as humans. I come from a country where there are 14 different ethnic languages in Afghanistan. In addition to that, you have also a lot of subgroups of languages. And so words has really been, in my journey, something that I've reflected a lot over. Like, what is the meaning of a word? Is this word limiting reality, or is this word giving me the opportunity to expand realities? And so I think that the word emergence, for me, the way that I interpret it is really the creation of the new, like being in the middle of creating the new. So the old is no longer serving you, whatever that old might be, whether it's a word, whether it's a story, whether it's an identity, but the new is not ready. And you're finding yourself in the middle of it, and you kind of see just the tip of something, but you're very unaware of what that is or what that might mean for you personally, but also for the larger collective.
Thank you, Samina. Very beautiful. So, yeah, you're Afghan. You had to leave your home country very early, I believe, so when you were still a child or in your teenage years,
Yeah.
because of an extremist political and religious movement. Can you explain how you experienced that abrupt move and how you settled with your family in Norway? And what were the feelings and insights going through you, during that whole process? What were the transformative moments, emerging during that process?
Thank you. I really feel that from the little that I know you, Rudy, I feel like I know you deeply. And so it's very fascinating to me that the word emergence comes first and then my story after, because I feel that in my life story, the way that I've learned to understand my story beyond the narratives of the world, because Afghanistan has been a very famous narrative for a lot of global platforms, media platforms around the globe for a really long time. The way that I've come to understand my story is that it's really been a story of multiple incidents of emergences. And I was born in Afghanistan in 1991. It was a very interesting time because it was 2 years after the withdrawal of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had invaded the country for 10 years before that. And I was born in a time where the Soviets had withdrawn from the country, but there was an emergence of young men that were incredibly lost, young Afghan boys that had been refugees in the neighboring countries. And at the time, most of their life was about war and most of their life was about fighting. So many of these young men joined the Taliban. And the Taliban was an extremist, fundamentalist, totalitarian group that I find to not be the best version of themselves. And they were in many ways representing the shadows of our collective world, full of hate, full of rage, no tools to understand how to circulate these really, really strong emotions, no clarity for the future, no vision for the country, no sense of belonging to humanity. And war was the best thing that they knew. That was born during a very interesting time. And I was also a daughter of an Afghan general, which is also a very interesting element to my story. And my father, he was the general of the largest military alliances called the Northern Alliance, that has later been referred to by also multiple international actors that have collaborated with the Northern Alliances to get access to the country later on during the Western intervention. And so I was very aware that my father was up in the Afghan mountains fighting against fundamentalist groups. I had very little awareness of what it really meant to be an Afghan because I was born in a world where I saw beauty. I mean, Afghanistan has incredible nature, which is often not something that we associate the country with today. So I was born in a very beautiful country surrounded by amazing nature, mountains and valleys and almond trees. But I felt a lot of unsettled emotions at a very young age. And some of it was obviously mine, but some of it was also my parents' uncertainties, my mother's uncertainty. She had brought a daughter to this world. And how was her future going to be in all of this? And so at age 4, we became refugees, and we were refugees in Pakistan. At the time, I think Pakistan had 5 million Afghan refugees. And the Pakistan itself as a country had its own conflict, the conflict that we see again today between Pakistan and India over Kashmir. Another conflict that is very much about the same things, about belonging and identity and history. And so it was the best of the worst options we had at the time. And so we were refugees in Pakistan for 5 years before we seek political asylum. In 2000, UN had something called quota refugees. And so within that refugee system, if you had a story that was linked to, for instance, political prosecution, then you could be granted asylum in a small number of countries. And Norway was one of them. And so my parents chose Norway because Norway was in Europe, and Europe, they felt that they knew. And so I came to Norway at age 9. And I arrived in a small town in northern Norway. Alex is from Finland, so maybe he can relate a little bit. It was a small fishing village. You had mountain on one side, ocean on the other side, 300 people. I witnessed snow for the first time. I saw people with blonde hair for the first time. I saw people with blue eyes for the first time. So it was quite a contrast. But I think the biggest one was to go from a lot of noise to complete silence. And, just not noise in terms of just rockets and war and helicopters, but also like music and community. And Afghanistan is basically in the heart of Middle East and the Arab world. So Afghans have had this tradition of always like talking together from the heart. And so going from that to coming to a place where it's just quiet and people go, hi, and that's pretty much it. And so, I mean, I think that my story wasn't is incredible, but it's not a very uncommon story because we see the same stories repeating itself in the world, especially what's happening in the Middle East right now.
Wow, what a fascinating story and such a rich heritage and the experiences you went through and going from Afghanistan to Pakistan to Norway to a little town of 300 people. Completely different. The contrasts are amazing. What do you think are some of your lessons or maybe strong moments that taught you things that help you do what you do today?
Thank you for that. I feel that my story is a story that people like you, Alex, and even you, Rudy, can relate to in many ways. I feel that a lot of people that I speak with today, like both of you, but also people that I work with, have more and more come to understand that we are so connected. We are not only connected energetically or spiritually, we're also connected when it comes to the desires that we have as humans, the desire to belong, the desire to understand what home is, the desire to understand how we can live a life free of fear, the desire to be completely free. And so when I came to Norway, to answer your question, Alex, these were not concepts that I was aware of at the time. I was 9 years old. These are concepts that I have come to understand more and more about my journey and also understand what is it that supported me and not just surviving that journey, but really wrap that journey around me and use it as a strength out in the world, both in connecting with other human beings, but also with the work that I've been involved in and the work that I'm currently doing. And I feel that the strongest thing for me was my parents' voice, my mother and my father. But I remember especially my father's voice. It hit me in the heart as a child. I really feel that every time when I think back about that time when we had to go through that journey from Pakistan to Norway, I really remember his eyes. My father, he has honey brown eyes. You know, Afghanistan has been a country that's always been in turmoil. At some point, someone called it the graveyard of emperors. And Genghis Khan was in the country as well, trying to conquer the Afghan mountains and didn't succeed. So my father's look is very Mongolian. And I remember that as a child, when he looked at me with his honey brown eyes, I don't know what he did, but he communicated to me that he sees me. I see you, not as a daughter, as a girl, but I just see you. And I think that really inserted in me this seed of that I am seen, so I belong. It doesn't really matter where I come from or where I am, I belong. That communication and also later his stories that tied me to my roots somehow, you know, showing me that if your roots are something that you just wrap around you and you bring with you wherever you go, really guided me and really supported me. And I also feel that I use Afghanistan a lot in the work that I do, even in my work with technology or AI or cybersecurity. I feel that I was gifted by the universe to have such a remarkable story that is so clear to so many is that, you know, it's a story that shows so many of us what can go truly wrong when we are not able to gather as humans, when we're not able to make room for different perspectives and different stories. It can go truly, truly wrong. And so I feel that Afghanistan gifted me with that, you know, you do belong, but right now it's really hard for so many people to feel that. It's so hard for a lot of people around the globe, even here in Norway, to feel that they truly belong here and that they matter and that they're seen. And so I feel privileged to also have carried that story, but also been inherited that story in many ways that I can use in so many creative ways to be a part of this emergence that we're currently in.
Wow, Samina, yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that story of your father, you know, looking into you or looking as seeing you, because that's probably the most important message that we can receive from our parents, that they see us. It's this deeply human feeling of connection and belonging and being home. actually. Yeah. So, and I also think it relates a lot to leadership today, like is a lot about how do we hold complexity, not just intellectually, but also emotionally, spiritually, and also recognizing this ancestral roots that we carry, like even genetically, like you, even with all these stories happening, and then you go back to Afghanistan, or you did work with United Nations to support Afghan women there. Can you explain a bit more about that? Why you don't go back to that roots, or where is that calling come from? Or, because for the same price, you could just decide like to choose for a luxury life in Norway and just decide like, okay, I love this luxury, I love this comfort living and, spending money and, go shopping and, live the life that many Western Europeans do. I think now these times are very crucial because every day seeing these images of Gaza, this is not about politics. This is about deeply human feelings of, are we able to care for each other? Or is it just something that's on TV, like another movie or another script that is running? I think this is the crucial part of, can we stay human in these crucial times? And this is probably also why we connect with each other, because in my experience, there are a lot of people who either have similar stories like you, who went through different cultures or who traveled a lot, who went through different experiences, and then come up with this, where do we need to move forward, is like we end up with regeneration. How do we take care of ourselves? How do we take care of each other? How do we take care of our planet? Perhaps refer back to your work to Afghanistan in that sense.
Yeah. I think that question can be answered in so many ways because there were so many levels to that decision that I made about returning to Afghanistan. The easiest answer is that that was the only thing my heart wanted to do. I couldn't explain it. I was just pulled in there. And I've reflected quite a bit on this, and I feel that we have different purpose as human beings. And I have come to realize more and more that my father and the way that he chose to manifest his being was through service. And for him, it was limitless until the point where he had 4 small children and he chose to stop the fighting and he chose to take his family out. And so I feel that for me, it was such a beautiful, but also challenging role model to look up to in a way, where I felt that I had a very strong feeling of service. I'm by no means my father, but I have inherited a lot from my father. And so I felt that, I had studied in these fancy schools and I had learned so much about how to make the world a better place, at least academically. I had some work experience from the US and Europe. And I was thinking for myself, what is all this for if it's not to try at least to build peace in a place that I was born? And so I decided to go back in 2015. I was there for a summer. And after that, I just decided that I'm going to do everything in my power to find something really meaningful to do and stay in Afghanistan as long as I can. So I lived there between 2018 to 2021. I came back to Norway a few months before the Taliban took power again. I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I was not one of those people that had to experience the extreme chaos that came over Kabul and also Kabul airport that I'm sure many of you saw images of in August 2021. And those years in Afghanistan were really meaningful years. I think the first thing that I learned was that I thought I was there to help Afghanistan, but Afghanistan is a country that I feel is like a really wise grandmother that has a lot of love, but also just slaps you in the face when you become too high on your ego. Actually, there are things here that we want to teach you as well that you are completely unaware of. And so I think Afghanistan really guided me into my own blind spots that were very much formed by living and studying the Western world. One of the greatest lessons was that you cannot measure human beings. You cannot measure growth. just through data and graphs and Excel sheets. You can't just write reports about what you want to do and track it. You really have to meet people in the heart. And what that means is that you have to meet yourself in the heart first in order to make that connection. So it was a very humbling experience. It was a very rich experience. And I can talk about this for a really long time.
That's fascinating. When I was young, I actually visited Afghanistan and I saw the Buddhas. They had these huge Buddhas carved into the mountain. And there's a photo of me with my father right by those Buddhas, which unfortunately now have been destroyed. Those are really a part of humanity. And it's so unfortunate that they were destroyed. You know, Rudy, if you can picture these enormous Buddhas carved into the mountain, it was truly extraordinary. But, you know, Samina, your story is like what I pick up from your story is this contrast between Afghanistan and Norway, or even between Pakistan and Norway. And it's like going from chaos to order, from war to peace, from uncertainty to stability, and also from, let's say, Afghanistan, more of a patriarchal, male-dominated society, especially during wartime, to Norway, which is more egalitarian. The feminine has a stronger role in Norway and in the Nordics, in Finland as well. And so I wonder, and your father is also such an incredible figure. I mean, he seems to be such a great male role model, you know, as a general in the military, but then he leaves that behind to take care of the family and to see you. So it's these quite incredible masculine qualities. How has this affected you? And being in Norway and the woman having more of a role in society or an equal role in society, how did this inform your own worldview? And what is the role of the feminine in creating systems and in culture in general?
Thank you, Alex. I am so glad you shared about the Buddhas in Afghanistan, because I feel that when we work in this field and trying to open up for, like, with the statement of that there is more. We just don't know what that more is, but there's more to what it means to be human. There's more to what it means to connect with each other. There's more to peace. There's more to love. There's more. And I feel that Afghanistan and Afghanistan's history has really been that for me as a very specific manifestation to bring up that, Afghanistan was a Buddhist country for a really long time. Afghans were Buddhists for over 1,000 years, and they built the biggest Buddha statues that were a part of the old Silk Route. It's really important to remember that the Silk Road was not really a road. It was a network that connected the East to the West, and in many ways, not just through trade, although trade is one of the areas that I feel is most known to the Western part of the world, because the Afghans and the Islam countries would bring gold from Rome. In return, they would send silk and they would send spices. It was also a network that in many ways connected cultures, connected language, connected stories. And so to remember that Afghanistan was at the center of this network, and it was a place where tradespeople would just stop and they would pray or be in silence with the Buddhas while they were traveling with their caravans. I think in many ways, at least for me, really opened up for this idea of that, wow, my country was a peace nation at one point. So it must be possible to bring that peace back, even if it looks really, really difficult right now. And how the feminine has been influencing my life and my journey, I really find to be a very good question that I am still learning a lot about, because as you're both aware, the feminine principle is very much a principle that has been suppressed for a really long time. Many places in the world, also workplaces in the Western part of the world and also in Norway. It's not a principle that is necessarily connected to womanhood. It's a principle that is very much based on trust and presence and surrendering. I feel that even though I come from a country that was far away from the Western part of the world, it was very much run by patriarchal principles for a really long time. The thing with the patriarchy is that it's suppressing both the masculine and the feminine. So it's not just that there's an absence of the feminine, it's also the absence of the true masculine. And so I was very confused about, what is what, because I was coming from a place where the patriarchy was represented to me through men, but I had this amazing father. So I felt that, it's not that the men are the problem. There's something else here. And so I was really trying to understand, what does it mean to be a woman in this story, both in terms of what it means to be a woman in the Afghan story, but also what does it mean to be a woman that's a refugee, a woman that's living in Norway, a woman that is active in the economy, a woman that is speaking about regulation and speaking about humanity and working on sustainability. And through that journey, I discovered more and more that the feminine principles within myself was also not in balance. I wasn't aware of that before I started to feel a pain in my shoulder, pain in my neck, just really strange places in my body. I have always been really healthy. I have run for 16 years. These were not signs of diseases or injuries. These were signals of that there's something that's not in balance in your body. I think that going inwards to really figure out what those imbalances were in myself showed me more about the imbalances out in the world as well. And so I think that what I came to learn eventually was that both the masculine and the feminine principles are not in balance. And how we can balance them is both work on ourselves within ourselves, but also communicate and convey this message outwards. And I feel that Norway has been really good for me because it is a place where you can find peace. It's not that the peace is just there, you have to find it. And for me, the Norwegian nature has been really helpful in doing so. But I think Norway also showed me that what's happening in the country right now is also not so good, because you have an evolution of more and more women taking up spaces and taking up leadership positions. But it doesn't necessarily mean that these women are connected with the feminine principles. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are balancing this imbalance that we see out in the world. And I find that for me now, it's more important to have someone that's in balance with themselves as a leader, as opposed to them being associated with a specific gender, because it's about how you lead, not your gender as a leader. And sometimes you can have a great man that is a great leader that really understands when to be in trust and when to act, as opposed to a woman.
Wow, Samina, so many messages just in that answer there. So I would like to bring this technology, which is also one of your topics, like ethical technology. But I loved your explanation that you mentioned about the Silk Road was not a trade road, but was a network, of cultures and stories. And, the internet to me in the beginning, in the early days, was also something that was, wow, had so much potential, because it was like the expansion of humanity, of like what this could become, when we connect beyond cultures, beyond differences, beyond polarization or whatever. And now, what, 2, 3 decades later, we ended up with basically the total opposite, which I refer to also, that the technology that has been created was mainly in a very masculine energy, but a masculine that was absent of true masculinity, which was not balanced. And a lot in the work that I do, the work that Alex is doing also, is basically how can we hold, polarity? How can we hold balance into this polarity and find a way for men again to connect them back to that true masculinity? Because what we are seeing now in the world is, and that is accelerated by the algorithms, by the systems that we are in, the system that has been envisioned, which is mainly extractive, is basically about what we're seeing is a huge shadow out there of the masculine that has never been treating this shadow, and this is the work that we need to do now. And it's not an easy work. It's a massive amount of work when we think about it. And it's a work that we need to do together also. But what I wanted to hear from you is also, how do you see the way of like how, why ethical and ethical technology is important. How can we re-envision? Do we need to recode everything? What needs to happen? Because I'm in a lot of groups also with tech guys, and there's a lot of goodwill of coding and recoding basically something different, that is good of human values, that is good of goodwill. Of how do we create this balance between feminine and masculine principles, and not just extraction or the wounded masculine or the immature masculine?
I am so grateful for the work that you do, Rudy, when it comes to working with men to connect to their true masculinity. We had a conversation early on when we connected about this, where I said that I also see the wounded feminine that is a part of the old worlds. So, what I see in technology is both the shadows of the wounded feminine and the wounded masculine. And for lack of a better word, I think manipulation is something that has been a topic that's been really important for me to uncover. My background is cybersecurity law. And some of the things that I have worked on is really try to understand how technology is influencing our worldview, how technology is using data, or technological platform is using our data, and for what purpose. Are we aware of the information that we're giving out about ourselves? And if not, what can we do about it? And so in this field, I feel that I can truly sense the feminine manipulation at play. Of course, not from a conscious place, of course, from an unconscious place. It's really about our own blind spots. Because just to use a very simple example, when we're on Instagram, I feel that what happens, it can still happen with me, is that I can be dragged into a dark loop of just spending more time there than I want to. And when I become aware that I've spent more time there than I want to, I realize that what the algorithms of Instagram or Meta is doing is that it's tapping directly into my blind spots. It's tapping directly into the places in myself that I haven't seen yet. And it just pulls me in there, whether it's like accounts of women with beautiful dresses or baking videos. The technology is showing me and showing us humans all the areas of ourselves that we haven't looked into, areas of ourselves that we haven't fully understood. It could be everything from that we're trying to escape from reality, or we are looking for something, but the answer is not necessarily in technology. With that said, I also see technology as a wonderful opportunity. I mean, what we're doing now is thanks to technology. And we should not be afraid of learning more about technology, engaging with technology, expanding our own consciousness through technology. But while doing so, I feel that if we see errors and we see red flags, the answer is not just in the machine. The answer is in the humans that are not just developing, but the humans that are also using these tools. Every time we use OpenAI, we feed it with information. So we can't just put the blame on that technology has been developed by young men and they want the world to look this way. There's some truth to it, but it's not the entire truth, because in many ways, what it does is that it takes the responsibility of the users completely away. I feel that we're all responsible actors when it comes to this. I find that when people ask me, what do we need? How can we get ethical AI? I feel like the answer to that question is that even with the most advanced technological systems, those systems can never include the element of understanding what human connection means through lived experiences as human beings. To some level, in order to truly become ethical about technology, we also have to gain some confidence in ourselves as human beings. We also have to come to a place with ourselves where we know that no one can take our humanity away. And then I feel like technology can really be a wonderful playground for innovation and development and growth.
Yeah, thank you. The ethics of all these systems that we're using and the social media and how it becomes so addictive and keeps you glued to the screen. And with AI, the questions are even greater. It's interesting that most developers, like software developers, were male. Actually, it was the male, the masculine, meant often the wounded masculine, sitting behind the computer coding these things. The internet itself is mostly or was mostly developed by men. And then this is layered in by commercialization, like the need to make money. And like each of these startups had to make money. They raised a lot and they had to make money. And so all of us, society as a whole, were pulled into this system, which was built by men and which was all about making money. And therefore it creates addiction. And it's all about productivity, or mostly about productivity, and less about art, less about living, less about intuition and creativity. One thing about you is that you create transformational spaces. And I'm really interested in that. I've helped build communities and I've done a lot of meetups, and this gathering of communities is so important. I feel it's vital. And so I'm curious, what makes these gatherings alive for you? How do you cultivate trust? Are you aware of like a field in the room? Is there anything that has surprised you about creating these spaces and meetings?
You feel that in some way, all of the topics we're talking about is connected, because it's truly about, it's very limiting to categorize topics and human beings as one thing, because often we're all connected and somehow these topics are also connected as something that's a part of a whole. And for me, gathering of people really comes from this understanding that before the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979, Afghanistan was already divided. The people were already very, very divided. Polarization was really high. There were multiple stories of what it meant to be an Afghan, what it meant to belong to Afghanistan. And all of these stories were fighting each other, the same way that we see in the Middle East today, and also in Europe, because we also have a war in Europe. And I feel what that story did to me is that I started to understand that there is a common pattern here. And the pattern is that human beings have a tendency, at large part, to think that it's only one reality that is valid. And if you have a different reality, Alex, you're immediately challenging mine. But the truth is, my reality and your reality is a part of a bigger picture. So none of us are actually sitting with the answer here. There is a third and a fourth and a fifth perspective on what it means to be a human being and what it means to belong and what it means to create and what it means to be ethical. And so the gathering of people really came from this motivation to try to understand, can we create spaces where we don't meet because we necessarily come from the same place or have the same belief, but we meet from the place of, I want to listen and I want to learn. I would like to challenge myself to be open also in places where it hurts, to see if there is more. And so this is where it came from. In the last 2 years, I have co-created and also created spaces where there's mainly been actors that have worked in the regenerative field because they have been open enough to come to such a place. But it doesn't mean that it's not open for people from all walks of life working in multiple different fields. It's really been about creating spaces for dialogue. And some of the things that I really enjoy doing is to open up the room to have a conversation coming from a wonder. Not necessarily, we are going to have this conversation because we want to write our 5-year strategy afterwards, but more, we want to have this conversation because this topic is burning in me. For instance, it could be a conversation about, how do you meet someone when you've learned all of your life that you've hated that person? And this is a conversation that I had with my Jewish family because I have a bonus family that's from Israel. I lived with them in the United States when I was 18 years old, and they became my second family. And there was love at first sight, and that love is still there. But we disagree. We disagree on what it means to call a place your home. And that disagreement is still there. But we have continued to engage in dialogue because we want to continue to meet each other in love and meet each other in the heart. and expand. And one of the greatest breakthroughs for me, Alex, and that experience has been that I came to look at places in myself where I was carrying judgment. I also met myself in places where I understood that I have a boundary here, and this boundary doesn't have to be here anymore. And so even if I feel that I, in many ways, have been the space holder, both for these spaces, but also for a dialogue, these spaces were never held just by me. It was all the people that were there. These conversations were never just held by me. It was by all of the people that were participating in them. And they, in return, showed me my own limitations. Right now, my main project is that I'm working on a book. The goal is to have the book published in September. And what will happen with gatherings and dialogue rooms after that is really depending on what will come after this book. But I feel it's something that has always been and always will be important for me in some form.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, going further on that, it's kind of like we come from ages of like sitting in circles, being in community, to the whole globalization, to now realizing that we need to sit back in community, need to sit back in circles and leave the knowledge and the mind a bit behind and just go and sit together and feel as humans again. So I wanted to also hear before the last part of like, what's the role of the community in this whole part of transformation and your vision of the world that we are moving towards? Because I know you have a daughter, a 2-year-old daughter. So what is your vision also to what you envision for your daughter, for your family?
The answer to that question is very easy. Community is absolutely everything. Absolutely everything. And one thing I want to add to your introduction to this question about sitting in circles again is that I feel what we have gained now that we didn't have before, and a lot of subcultures that's still happening. But I think as a larger collective, what we are gaining from sitting back in circles now is that we have evolved our mind, we have evolved our intellect, and we don't have to leave that behind. It can also be there. I think that this alignment between mind and body and whatever spirit you're connected to all has space there. And in terms of the future, I feel the only thing I can do for my daughter is to support her and regulate her nervous system because she's 1.5 years old. And that is my most important job. For the rest, I really pray that I have the courage and I have the faith and not intervene too much with her life because she chose to be here at her own will. And so I hope I can be an observer, a guide when she wants me to, enjoy being an observant of her life.
That's wonderful. Can you tell us something about your book? What is it about? And then also maybe talk about what you see coming in the future. Like what is emerging for the future? Or like, I feel like we're in some kind of transition period in the world, period of collapse, institutions are collapsing. There's a lot of change going on very quickly. So what do you see emerging in the world and for your daughter? What seeds have been planted for the future?
My book is very much about some of the topics we have touched upon here. It's a book that is very integrative in a way where I didn't choose it to be that way, but it turned out to be that way, that is braiding philosophy, poetry, psychology, politics with my personal story from Afghanistan to Norway, out to the world and back home to myself. And I have also written about this in my book that I feel some of the things that you are touching upon, Alex, we are in the middle of something really, really fundamental, important. A lot of the old is collapsing under its own weight. But I really hope that, and I think we all are aware of this idea of letting go and being open for the new. But what I am seeing, and I am more and more gaining the courage to also communicate outside myself, that not everything is meant to be let go of. Because I feel that even if we are in the middle of a major transformation and a lot has to go, I really feel that this is a very important moment for people like us to understand what has been serving us really, really well that we need to make sure doesn't go with the collapse right now. And I say this because the Western world, most of the world, was in Afghanistan for 20 years. And then when the withdrawal happened, they took everything with them. So you had schools that were newly built, but with no students, and hospitals with no doctors. When I went back to Afghanistan a year after the Taliban takeover, I think what hit me the hardest was like, why didn't we want to save some of these gains? Why did everything have to go? Because humans have done great things and we have had our shortcomings and blind spots because you are meant to. And now we're ready for more. So I really am inviting for those that have the capacity to also reflect over what is it that we don't want to lose in this transformation? What is it that we can build further on? And what is it that we can water so that it can become something new and something more? For me, to be very concrete, I really feel connected to the Norwegian nature. The more time I spend here, the more it becomes so clear to me that my father was fighting for the Afghan mountains and I would fight for the Norwegian mountains because I found peace here.
Wow, that's a beautiful ending, Samina, because I think we are all in for a quest for beauty, and not everything needs to be destruction. I think the beauty of being human is that we can recognize the beauty within each other and what we can give to each other, what we can create for each other and co-create for our children that are coming after us. So there's so much beauty in the world when we are able to see it. With that, you answered our last question already. I thank you so much for your presence and your wise words and sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much for the wonderful conversation, and good luck with your book.
Thank you. I just want to give you both feedback. And I was thinking while we were having this conversation that I have never felt that I was so held during a digital conversation as now. I'm so grateful to have two very warm, masculine, safe. I don't even want to call you men because I feel you were something more during this conversation. Thank you for that experience. It really means a lot to me.
Wow, thank you, Samina. We are going to take that with us and carry this forward. Thank you so much. And let us know about your book and when it's released. We are happy to include that in our podcast or in our network. Please send it forward to us also, so we are happy to read it. Good luck with your future endeavors and projects, and I'm sure we're going to meet soon again in one other constellation.
We will. Take good care.
Say hello.